to announce anything? No? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Hi, Don. Hi. I just wanted to make sure, Margaret, you're all set in the Gampa. Just a quick, because they just logged in. So
welcome everyone to today's little get together for talking about practicing Buddhism minute by minute. I guess we could even call this moment by moment or instant by instant. We'll work on this topic shortly. Let's go ahead and just do one prayer before we begin, and then we'll do just a very short reflection in order to set our motivation for being here today. So the prayer that I want to lead you in is the taking refuge. So again, this is an encapsulation of these two ideas, taking refuge in the three jewels, really finding that that is our safe protection, our safe direction in life, and then also generating the motivation of bodhicitta, which we'll also be talking about a lot today, because this is obviously how we make the most out of every minute of our lives. So let's recite this in English, and then I'll do it twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, daki chanyan gipe sonam gi, dola penchir sangye drupar shok. Sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, daki chanyan gipe sanam gi, dola penchir sangye drupar shok. Okay, good. And as I said, just do a very short reflection. We're not going to spend a lot of time. Last week we did a little bit longer meditation when we were looking at listening and our experiences around listening. Today we're just going to spend like a minute or two focusing on the breath just to calm the mind a bit, and then we'll set our motivation together. So I'll just ring the bowl here to begin that. And again, just a minute or two of working with the breath, however you prefer. So as we set our motivation, let's begin by just really rejoicing at the opportunity that we have right now in this minute, in this moment. We've all come together with some good intention already, wanting to partake of the Buddha's teachings, wanting to help develop our own minds according to the Buddhist path. So we can rejoice that we're here together, rejoice in ourselves being here and each other being here. And recognize that in this time that we have together, there is the potential to create the seeds for the greatest welfare for both ourselves and all sentient beings. And we do that by generating this motivation of bodhicitta, thinking that we want to ideally accomplish the welfare of all beings. That's the main goal. But to do that, we do have to develop ourselves. We see that we're simply not capable in our current situation of helping others to that degree. So we set that strong intention of developing ourselves completely into the state of Buddhahood, so we then can help all other beings to do the same. It's for this reason that we're here today, infusing this moment as well as all of the time we spend together, as well as this day and even beyond, with that wish to be of greatest benefit to all beings by becoming enlightened ourselves. Okay, good. It's so good to see so many friendly faces, familiar faces in the Zoom room today. So again, today's topic is practicing Buddhism minute by minute. I think a lot of these topics that I sort of recycle, and every time I revisit them, I try to do something different and increase maybe some of what I'm offering, so that if you have heard this talk before, which I think I did do at Tupten Kungaling many years ago, it'll be something a little bit different today. But obviously, we see that there's this idea of how do we practice Buddhism. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and share kind of the main outline of what I'm going to talk about today, and what does it mean to practice Buddhism and so on. But obviously, this is going to be the main topic we're going to go into, and the large part of it being how do we actually do this? Because obviously, we want to make it very practical. The first question, what does it mean to practice Buddhism? And then we're going to look briefly at what are the things that hinder our practice of Buddhism, because we do need to talk about those and recognize what is keeping us from accomplishing this idea of every moment practicing the Buddha's teachings. And then thirdly, what does it actually look like to practice Buddhism minute by minute? And here I'll use a number of approaches to this, kind of enlarging on some of what I've done before, using some of Rinpoche's advice and so on, to see how we can actually accomplish this. So I want to start off by talking about this idea of what it means to practice Buddhism minute by minute. And I have a little book that actually is mostly a Lam Rem book. It's called How to Practice the Way to a Meaningful Life by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And at the very beginning of this, he talks about how we essentially have this idea that, of course, we've all been adopting to some degree throughout our lives and throughout countless other lifetimes. And maybe even some of us still have that pattern in our lives of looking outside of ourselves for happiness and well-being. We can say that the Buddhist path, and what we mean by practicing Buddhism at the deepest level, is creating the causes for happiness and freedom from suffering. But of course, we have to know how to do that properly. And the Dalai Lama speaks in here about how this tendency to look outside of ourselves for those results, to find our happiness from external causes, isn't really ideal. So I'm just going to share a little bit about this. He says there are two ways to happiness, two ways to create happiness. The first is external. By obtaining better shelter, better clothes, better friends, we can find a certain measure of happiness and satisfaction. And this is true, right? And His Holiness isn't denying that that's a part of our happiness. It is good to have good physical conditions around us, to have ideal things so that we don't have to be contending with some of the grosser forms of suffering, not having enough food to eat, not having a roof over our heads, and so on. The second is through mental development, which yields inner happiness. Rinpoche often calls this the happiness of Dharma, the happiness of Buddhism, the inner happiness that we can actually cultivate that isn't dependent upon the external situation. So he says, however, these two approaches are not equally viable. External happiness cannot last long without its counterpart, right? We get something for the moment and then it fades away or something else interrupts it. We are unable to sustain the causes of happiness externally. And this is, of course, what most people are striving for. And we look at the world that we live in, can even break our hearts sometimes to see so many people putting all the onus on external situations, on having everything kind of lined up, have the perfect job with the perfect partner and the perfect house and the perfect city with the perfect, everything. And impossible, really, first of all, to get everything perfect on the outside. But even once if you happen to, chance upon that, you have everything lined up correctly, well, it's not going to stay the same. Things change. This is, of course, the nature of phenomena as being impermanent. Everything around us constantly changing, our own selves changing. So he says, if something is lacking in your perspective, if something is missing in your heart, then despite the most luxurious surroundings, you cannot be happy, because we haven't gone to the deeper sources of happiness within us. Continually put the onus on the outside stuff, well, then eventually we're going to find that that will fail us, because we haven't developed that inner capability. And then to conclude, he says, however, if you have peace of mind, if you have that inner happiness and well-being, you can find happiness even under the most difficult circumstances. And every one of us can probably look to times in our life where we've been challenged externally with various things going on, but because we had something to draw upon internally, we were able to endure it. We were able to get through it. So we see that in Buddhism, the focus is not, obviously, and most of us know this, it's just good to reiterate it. The focus is not on changing the external. Yes, if the external is a problem, you can change it, but don't put all of your money on that. That's not going to solve all of your problems. We know this from looking at the world we live in and so many people who are surrounded with, so many resources and beautiful homes all over the world and what have you. And still they have marital problems. They have, other problems. They oftentimes even, commit suicide. We have celebrities who take their own lives because even though they have fame and all sorts of other things going on for them, they know that that isn't really solving the deeper problem. So happiness obviously comes from inside. And of course, that means it comes from a process of mental development. So let's go back to the slides. I want to point out the kind of topics that I'm going to be working with in this first question. That first one that we just went through, moving our focus from the external to the internal. This is really key. This is something that we do have to get at a very deep level. In fact, the word in Tibetan for a Buddhist means an inner being, somebody who is looking inside to develop their mind. So when we say practicing Buddhism, we mean you're an inner being. You are looking to the internal and focusing on that as the source of happiness. So then we have this idea of working with the mind. And what does that mean? And then we'll finally look at overcoming mental confusion. Well, essentially, when everything is boiled down in Buddhism, we see that there is this law of cause and effect, karma, that is really key to everything the Buddha taught. In fact, Venerable Dundrup, Neil Houston was his lay name. He's an Australian monk, really wonderful teacher. Maybe some of you have had the opportunity to meet him or have teachings from him. I recall that in his teachings for the Discovering Buddhism module on All About Karma, he said, some people question what is the most important teaching of the Buddha. Maybe some people think it's compassion, bodhicitta. Some people think it's emptiness, what have you. But he says perhaps the most important teaching is karma. Karma is the governing principle by which we experience the results of happiness or suffering. And of course, if we plant the seeds for happiness, then this is what ripens into our future experiences. If we plant the seeds for suffering, then we have to experience those. So it all comes down to, what are we doing with our minds? And then, of course, our body and speech follow our minds. Our bodies don't do things without our minds being involved. Our speech doesn't come out of our mouth without us being some sort of mental intention behind what we're saying. So we see that everything starts with the mind. So we have kind of at the deepest level, of course, we're trying to achieve happiness and avoid suffering. But then the mechanism by which we do that is by attending to our minds. Adopting those thoughts that lead to the result of happiness, which are our virtuous thoughts, wholesome thoughts, the thoughts that many of us already know and embrace, compassion, loving kindness, faith, and so on, all these really wonderful aspirational states of mind, and then avoiding all the negative states of mind, the anger and the jealousy and the pride and the greed and all the various things that block us from having the causes of happiness and therefore having to experience suffering. So this is really what we're attending to in Buddhism, is to be diligent in looking at our minds constantly, always wanting to assure that the seeds that we plant are the best ones for our own future experience, but of course also because others will benefit from that. It's interesting when we take a look at what constitutes the wholesome thoughts and the unwholesome thoughts, it really boils down to whether we are in line with this fundamental idea of not harming others. Buddhist teachings are rooted in this Sanskrit term. It's called ahimsa, which is non-harmfulness. Remember, His Holiness the Dalai Lama often says this, right? He says, we should do whatever we can not to harm others. Or he says, wait, let me start over again. He says, we should do whatever we can to help others. But if we cannot help them, at least do not harm them. So the bottom line is stop harming others, but also stop harming yourself. All of what we do that leads to our own future suffering is created through the power of our own minds. If we're attentive and diligent and looking at our minds constantly and trying to work with overcoming these negative states, well, then obviously we will experience different results. We won't have to continue to experience suffering. But of course, others will also be benefited because the less harmful minds that we have, the less minds of anger and jealousy and so on, the more that other people will be at peace. So again, we have the third topic under this first question of, what does it mean to practice Buddhism? I had on the screen overcoming mental confusion. Well, essentially, we have two levels of confusion. I could say we're confused about a lot of things, but essentially, they boil down to sort of two levels of ignorance or confusion that the Buddha emphasized. And the first one is the confusion about this law of cause and effect, how karma essentially plays out. Most beings don't have an awareness of this. And once more, it can really break our hearts when we watch them going about engaging them in actions that only lead to their own future suffering. Of course, they're driven in the moment by trying to achieve their own happiness and well-being, but in the process, they only create the causes for more suffering. But we too are often ignorant of this and have confusion with regard to this. This is why studying karma and really getting to know karma, which isn't something I'm going to focus on today, but really having that as a groundwork for all of your Buddhist practice is so important. Because this is really our job, is to constantly attend to our minds, to keep from planting the seeds that will lead to our future suffering through the force of karma, and then also to adopt those that will lead to our happiness. So having that confusion obviously is one thing that needs to be overcome, to actually, remove that so that we have this faith and conviction in karma. It can be tricky because obviously karma isn't the sort of thing that can be proven. Even His Holiness the Dalai Lama can't prove karma to you, as wonderful, highly developed a being as he is. Karma is a very subtle process that's working all the time, an energetic sort of process. But it makes sense when we look at it within the wider scope of the law of cause and effect that we live within our world. We know and have great reliance upon cause and effect in the physical world because we do everything we can to, you know, for example, if we want to grow a vegetable garden, I often use it as a case. Of course, here in New Mexico, we have about a couple months span where we can grow vegetables, and that's about it. You know, and right now we're getting all sorts of wonderful rain, so the vegetable gardens are loving it. But you know that you don't just sit there, and look out your window and say, why aren't vegetables growing in my garden? If you never planted the seeds for it, you never tilled the soil to plant the seeds, you never, removed all the weeds so that you could till the soil. I mean, all the various things need to happen in order for you to get vegetables in your garden. So we know this in the physical world, and as I said, we have great confidence in it. Well, we lack that confidence sometimes with regard to our experiential world. Everything we experience is a product of our own past actions. We have to constantly remind ourselves of that so that everything that we meet, we recognize that there's an opportunity then to change how we respond to it. Rather than continue to habitually follow these patterns that we have been since beginningless time, we have to adopt new ways of responding to things so that we can actually stop creating the causes for our own suffering. And of course, having that awareness becomes the key to everything. That's why I do agree with Venerable Dundrup. It is perhaps the most important teaching, because whether you are aiming to just not experience suffering in this life, avoid suffering in your future life, attain some state of freedom from suffering once and for all through attaining nirvana, liberation, or going beyond that to attain Buddhahood, you have to depend upon the law of cause and effect. There's no way to accomplish it without being very mindful, heedful of your karma and what you're creating. So this is really, again, one level of confusion that we have to overcome. Now, the deeper level of confusion is also not a topic I'm going to go into in great depth today. It's the confusion that we have about the nature of reality. This ignorance that is much subtler and is playing a role in terms of keeping us obscured and keeping us from attaining liberation and enlightenment. And that's the ignorance. It's grasping at things as if they had some reality from their own side, as if they were able to set themselves up, able to be self-established. So that error, we also, of course, want to work on as part of our Buddhist practice, to overcome that deeper ignorance. And that can be something that we can use as part of our daily practice, of course, to remind ourselves of that and to engage in the teachings on emptiness, the lack of this way of existing that is so important to develop ourselves completely, spiritually. So these two levels of confusion, obviously, are when it comes to real tasks that we want to accomplish, are a key part of our Buddhist practice. So again, just to recap, Buddhist practice means moving from the external to the internal, recognizing that our minds are really the source of all of our happiness and well-being, as well as the source of our suffering. And so therefore we have to attend to our minds in adopting what will lead to greater well-being for ourselves as well as for others. And that means, of course, overcoming some of this confusion that we have. The mechanism by which we create that is the law of cause and effect, karma, and the deeper way that we attain more lasting, abiding states of well-being is through overcoming that subtler level of confusion that we have, the confusion about the nature of reality. So, in a nutshell, I'm really kind of condensing things today. That's what we could say constitutes Buddhist practice. Now, obviously, there are many things within that that we can include. And those of you who've been around Tibetan Buddhism for a while know that there's no shortage of practices in Tibetan Buddhism. There are many, many things that we can do that are more formal practices and so on. Let's talk a little bit about some of these obstacles or hindrances that keep us from doing that work every day, that keep us from being fully engaged in this tendency to, be more focused on the inside, work with our own minds, overcome our own mental confusion. And that's one. Actually, I did insert this. I forgot. I inserted this. This is from a little article that's from Alex Berzin's his previous website. It was much easier to find things, I think, on his earlier website. This you can probably still find out at his new website, studybuddhism.org. But he says here, our work in the Dharma is to be introspective and attentive to our attitudes, our disturbing emotions, and our impulsive, compulsive, or neurotic behavior. That means being willing to see things in ourselves that are not so nice, things we would rather deny. Of course, that's a little bit of the resistance that we do have, is that looking at our own stuff isn't easy. And it's not very pleasant sometimes to see the way that we actually are inside. When we notice things that are causing our problems or are symptoms of our problems, we need to apply opponents to overcome them. All of this is based on study and meditation, right? We can't even fully engage in Buddhist practice unless we've done some study and some level of meditation. We have to learn to identify disturbing emotions and attitudes and where they come from. And of course, as I said, the deeper confusion that will need to be removed in order to attain more lasting states of well-being. So let's go on to the next topic, because again, I don't want to dwell too much on that, what it means to practice Buddhism, but rather look at how do we actually do this? What are the tools that we've been given by our gurus and the Buddha that will help us to accomplish this goal? So first of all, a very short topic, I just want to spend a bit on what hinders our practice of Buddhism. No doubt we could find many things beyond this list of 3 that I put together. The first one, lacking mindfulness and focus. I mean, this is why, again, some sort of meditation practice is really important, but it's important that we not just do that on our cushion. When we get up off our cushion after having spent some time in mindful awareness of the breath or mindful awareness of a topic that we've been meditating on, that we continue to hold that mindfulness. In the Vipassana tradition, many of you perhaps have taken or gone to Vipassana retreats. They sometimes hold them over a weekend, sometimes they are 10-day retreats, sometimes even longer retreats. But they're really wonderful opportunities to kind of immerse oneself in a practice of mindfulness. Now, mindfulness, again, you might have different approaches from different Buddhist traditions. What we essentially mean is this ability to be non-forgetful with regard to what's going on in our minds. So if we're practicing mindfulness on the cushion, it's being mindful of the object that we're focusing on. So that mindful awareness is really important to have to keep your focus, to keep your concentration going. When we get up off the cushion, though, obviously it's not just mindfulness of the breath, because I'm not going to continue watching my breath for the rest of the day. It's mindfulness of how I am in the world, how I am doing what I'm doing. And we lose that mindfulness. We become mindless. And consequently, because of not having that focus and not having that awareness, we forget what we're supposed to do. So again, I can't fix that for all of you. I can't come up with a magic tool to say suddenly you're going to have mindful awareness every moment of the day and never stray from the path. Because Buddhism is a bit of a 24/7 deal, right? It's constantly working with our minds because our minds are there all the time. But to have that mindful awareness, at least strengthen it, does require some level of meditation practice. But as I said, a more concerted effort when we get up off the cushion to actually maintain that mindful awareness, to be able to be present with whatever's going in our minds and constantly checking out to see what's happening. This is where we perhaps need another tool that wasn't on that slide. It's what we call introspection, or guarding alertness, I think is the term is sometimes used. Master Shantideva in his text has a wonderful chapter on these two. Mindfulness is kind of what holds you to what it is that you're focusing on and being with. Introspection is sort of like a spy that checks in occasionally to see if you're still doing what you need to be doing. And if you are, fine, then the introspection can take a break. But we need that sort of introspective awareness to check out to see what's going on in our minds. Are we really being aware of what we're supposed to be doing? Or have we lost that mindfulness? Have we reverted to ways of being that are not so helpful? So if our key practice through the day is to be attentive to our minds to induce those more positive states, to reduce the negative ones, if we say that's our goal, well, then a mindful awareness of that constantly will keep us from going astray, keep us continually cultivating those positive states of mind, continually averting and overcoming the negative states of mind, the confusion and so on. So one of the other things that of course gets in the way of our really practicing Buddhism to the greatest degree is following our habitual reactions. And we can include in this all of our ordinary delusions, our greed, our desire, our anger and hatred, and pride and jealousy and what have you. I'd really like to distinguish these two. I think I may have mentioned this to some of you before, this idea of a reaction versus a response. We're trying to be more responsive to what's going on in the world through having studied and practiced Buddhism, through the force of that generating greater and greater strength to be able to have healthier responses to what's going on. But our habitual reactions continually take over. And that's because, guess what, folks? We've been doing those things since beginningless time. It's kind of hard to get our heads around that. This is why I'm always amazed. Some people say, well, I've been practicing Buddhism for a year and I'm not seeing much change. Well, that's not very much time compared to beginningless time that you've been following these delusions. I hate to use this analogy sometimes because I hope it's not too discouraging for people to hear, but it's in a sense, we've created a current and we're sort of the boat on that current. The current is our own energy of thoughts and reactions that we have bought into since beginningless time. The first job is to get the boat to go in the opposite direction. I don't know if you've ever tried this on like a white water river. It's pretty difficult, right? You got to work really hard to get it to go in the opposite direction. But that's only the beginning of the change. The change eventually is to get the whole river to flow in the opposite direction, which of course in physical terms is kind of impossible. But in terms of our minds, it is possible. It just means we have a lot to fight against. There's a lot of force of our past that continually dictates what we do now. So we tend to react quite similarly to how we have reacted before. When we are bothered by somebody who pushes our buttons, then we continually have thoughts and then maybe say things or do things that are not so beneficial, that are harsh and cutting and what have you. So this is what we have to contend with. And again, I'm not discouraging you by saying this. I'm just saying recognize that change is not instantaneous. We can see some change maybe after a year, but the deeper changes will come only after repeated practice. So recognize that one of the hindrances that we have is our own past actions, reactions that we continue to buy into, we continue to give strength to. But that's the only way things change. It's kind of interesting, first of all, His Holiness points out this whole idea that we have this, law of contradiction that's going on. If we are doing something that is positive, it will keep the negative from arising, right? If you are continually holding thoughts of loving kindness towards that person who pushes your buttons, then you're not going to have thoughts of anger and hatred and what have you arising, because that will block it. Moreover, these thoughts of hatred and so on are all rooted in that deeper confusion that I mentioned, the confusion of grasping at things as if they're real. At that time, we are thinking we are real. We're thinking the other person is real and their words are real and everything is real. And we buy into it at such a deep level that we give it so much energy and power. If we, of course, undermine that at the deepest level, then all of those delusions fall away, and you no longer have any hatred. You no longer have any jealousy, pride, greed, what have you. All those things are rooted in ignorance and depend upon ignorance. So again, what we have to contend with is, first of all, trying to supplant, as Alex was saying, the more negative states of mind, our habitual reactions, with more healthy responses, more wholesome states of mind. Which means, of course, we do have to become familiar with those, and that's what we're going to talk about when we get into, what does it look like to actually practice Buddhism minute by minute? It means continually bringing those thoughts to mind, bringing an awareness to mind. We'll get into that shortly. But recognize that these habitual patterns are really hard to overcome. It does take a lot of work. All right. Again, not trying to discourage you, trying to encourage you to know that the job can be done. It's just a matter of taking the time and energy to do it. And that gets it to the last point. Another reason why our practice of Buddhism isn't perhaps as strong as we'd like it to be is because we lack some level of effort and enthusiasm for what we're engaging in. We tend to be, it's kind of interesting. One Lama said, we relish so much all these wonderful things that we have in our world, once more, a bit of a focus on the external, that are arising through the force of our own virtuous actions of the past. But we don't put as much attention on creating those virtuous actions so that we can assure that we continue to have those things. So if you have lots of delightful, delicious, wonderful things in your life, recognize they came from your own past actions that were virtuous. If you want to continue to enjoy those things, if you want to continue to have those things, you have to be attentive to the causes. It's just like, once more, your vegetable garden. If you say, oh, we had such wonderful vegetables, from my garden, from all the work I did and whatever, well, then, if you want to continue to have good vegetables, you have to keep creating the causes. You have to keep attending to your garden, making sure that everything is growing and what have you. It's the same with regard to karma. If we want to continue to have the wonderful things in our life, we have to put some energy and effort into accomplishing those. In the Buddhist path, we often talk about a couple of other factors that feed into our effort, and I want to mention them briefly. The first one is faith. And in Buddhism, faith, I think I've done this talk before too, faith in Buddhism, but I'm going to abbreviate it obviously quite a bit today. Faith in Buddhism isn't a blind faith. It isn't where we just say, oh, I really believe, I believe in the Buddha, I believe in Buddha's teachings. It's a faith that is grounded in our practice, a faith that is grounded in our confidence that we gain through having worked with these teachings and having seen that there is a result from them, a positive result. That's where we get our deepest conviction in the Buddha's teachings and our deepest level of faith. Faith will help us to create the second cause that leads to effort, which is an aspiration. If we see that the teachings work, then we put an aspiration forward. We have a strong wish and desire to engage in the teachings, to actually do what we can to move in the direction that the Buddha taught towards attaining good results in samsara, but moreover, attaining freedom from samsara, liberation, attaining enlightenment, and so on. So we see again that these two factors play a key role. If you're lacking energy and effort in your practice, well, maybe your aspiration isn't strong enough. And your aspiration, it might not be strong enough because your faith isn't strong enough. Well, again, your faith comes from study, working with the teachings as best as you can so that you understand the logic of them and develop deeper and deeper conviction in them. Your own experience begins to make your faith even stronger. And then your aspiration will grow even stronger because we see that the path that we have great faith in actually can be followed to lead to its result. And so we roll up our sleeves and do the work. So again, that faith and aspiration I want to just point out, because they're often talked about in the context of developing meditative skills, but they're in the context of everything that we do in the Buddhist path. If your effort is lacking, look to your aspiration. And if that's lacking, look to your faith. And your faith, once more, comes from your involvement with the teachings. Maybe you need to attend more teachings, read more, reflect more, meditate more. I know that takes effort too, don't get me wrong, but the reality is that that's the only way we're going to strengthen our faith and thereby have a deeper aspiration and actually put the work into doing it. As I said, I'm sure there are many other things we could identify as hindrances to our practice of Buddhism. Maybe I'll actually stop it here and just take, maybe if anyone did want to share anything. Do you have any from insights from your own experience practicing Buddhism that you feel are hindrances that you've identified and are trying to work with that you feel comfortable sharing? I'm not putting anyone on the spot here, but did anyone have anything they wanted to share? Just thought I'd open that up. And obviously we can see that, our preoccupation again with a lot of external things in our life, our work life, family life, what have you, these can be problematic. But as we're going to look at today, even they can be done with Dharma thoughts, with Dharma practice. Because once more, practice boils down to what are you doing with your mind? Doesn't necessarily have to do with what's going on externally. Obviously, we want to avoid harmful things externally. Being like killing animals while you're holding virtuous thoughts isn't the ideal way to live your life. But we can do most of what we do that's kind of in a more neutral category or even a more virtuous category, certainly with much greater, stronger thoughts of virtue. So nothing that anyone wanted to share?
Excuse me, Don.
Yes.
Graciela has a question.
Who was that?
Graciela
Oh,
has a
Graciela.
question.
Yes, Graciela, please. Good to see you, Graciela.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I was just, it's not really sharing what comes to mind right now, but I do have a question. And you spoke about the delusions and the disturbing emotions are rooted in ignorance.
Mhm.
And I wonder whether you might say more about what ignorance is from
Sure.
the Buddhist perspective.
Sure. Okay, thank you, Graciela, for that question. Yeah. So again, when we talk about that deeper level of ignorance that all of the delusions are rooted in, again, we use these sort of terms that oftentimes don't mean so much because we go, oh, it's the belief or the conviction holding to things as inherently existent or intrinsically existent. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, essentially, he boils it down to just saying, we think things are real. Now, again, when he says it, he doesn't mean that this is completely false. There is some level of reality, but the way that we think of reality, we imbue everything with a much greater identity than what it actually possesses. Probably the best way, again, I don't want to spend too much time going down this avenue, though it is an important part of our practice, obviously. Most kind of easiest way, in my estimation, to recognize how things actually exist and thereby how they don't exist is this whole idea of dependent arising, interdependence. Things arise on the basis of a variety of things. For example, let me use this little tea mug that I have here. This is actually a glass tea mug, so it arises from all of the sand that was ground down into glass, and the glass being heated and made into this cup, and then of course all of the various color that went into it, and then the person who was attending to the process of it and designing it and what have you. You have all of those sort of causes and conditions that are involved, and that's one level of interdependence that's going on. And sometimes, although we acknowledge that and recognize that, sometimes we're even kind of blind to that. We think things exist somewhat independently of their causes and conditions, but they actually depend upon those greatly. A second level that we could talk about it is its dependence upon its parts. And obviously with a cup, we have the handle and we have the base and we have the sides and we have, the inside, the rim, all of these various things. All of these parts constitute the whole that we call a cup. And so essentially you have a dependence of the whole on the parts. And this goes with everything that exists. Everything has a sort of wholeness, a unitariness that is independence upon the multiplicity of parts, because we see even those parts I pointed out are not the end of it, because we have many, many, subtler parts. We have down to microscopic parts and subatomic parts and all the various things that go on that they're researching into and what have you. But then in the end, we see the subtlest way that this exists is that what I'm holding in my hand is simply a basis for what we call cup. That cup is simply a label, a designation, an idea, a concept that we have in regard to this. And we sort of have all agreed to call this a cup. Of course, in our language, in English language, it's called a cup, and many other languages it will have a different name, sometimes a little similar, sometimes very different. They give different names to it, the language to it, but the concept of a cup is the way that we are designating this phenomenon that we refer to then as a cup, in whatever language that we're referring to it. What I'm holding in my hand then is actually not a real cup. It isn't even a cup per se, because it is the basis for what we label as cup. Just like if we kind of take it away from cups and external things and we talk about the person, you, any one of you, myself, we see that there's a collection of stuff that we think is us. We think there's a real me here, right? We live our lives with that concept of a real me. Well, all that is here, I hate to say it, is a mind and a body, and obviously many parts to the body, many parts to the mind. There is no real I here. The I is simply a designation, a label that I give to this collection of stuff. So this ignorance is holding there to be a real I here, a real you here, a real everything, cup, computer, chair, table, whatever, all these various phenomena. And it grasps at them as being real. And on the basis of that level of reality, we're buying into a whole fiction that then the delusions arise on the basis of that. Our anger, our hatred are always rooted in ignorance because they require that level of grasping at things as real. And then we have the conflict that we have with others, or we have the jealousy of others, or whatever goes on. So it's the best way for me to explain it in this moment. Again, I could spend a lot more time on it. It's a whole topic unto itself. In fact, I'm going to be doing a bit of a retreat. Finally, Vajrapani Institute in California is opening up for an in-person retreat. So I'll be leading a retreat at the end of July on the Heart Sutra and the emptiness teachings. It takes a lot to get our heads around it. But the fundamental understanding is that this ignorance that grasps at things as if they're real is the real problem, the root problem. And as long as that is there, the delusions will arise. When we uproot that, there's no ground for the delusions at all. Now, the positive states of mind, they can be grounded in wisdom, because even with the wisdom that realizes things aren't real in this way, I can still hold compassion for beings who are merely labeled, who are merely designated. There's nothing more than that, but that's enough. Things still do exist, the Buddha said, but they exist really, really subtly. But our ignorance concretizes them so much, makes them into this whole thing. It's kind of like if you were watching TV and you were buying into the reality of some TV show that was pure fiction, and you were like thinking the characters were completely real and everything, and feeling all the emotions of it because that has to be real. Well, you're imbuing it with a fiction that isn't really there. It's just a TV show. It's just something that is created by somebody with actors playing these characters and what have you. People aren't really dying, and people aren't really suffering and doing all these things. They're just going about, showing it. Well, again, we're not saying that there is absolutely nothing there. There still is something going on, but it's not the way it appears. It appears to be much more real, and we grasp at it as much more real. That's the root problem. And that causes all these other delusions to occur. Because once we concretize the sense of self and the sense of other and so on, well, then we get in trouble. And all these various states arise on the basis of that. Okay, so I hope that's enough for you, Graciela, and I'll hopefully get an opportunity to speak more on emptiness, maybe when I'm down in Florida in September. But so let's go into a bit of what this means then, and what does a daily practice look like, and what are the sorts of tools that we have that we can work with. As I said, I want to spend most of the time on this. We got about half the class left to go into this, so let's go ahead and get there. So what does it look like to practice Buddhism minute by minute? Obviously, as I said, it does require some level of overcoming those hindrances. So the hindrances that were just on the screen means you have to have a bit more mindfulness through your meditation practice, be able to focus the mind, try to be attentive to these habitual reactions, try to generate more effort and enthusiasm. But let's talk about some of the other tools that are out there. The first one is what we call practicing Lam Rem mindfulness. Most of you are familiar with the Lam Rem. I actually wrote a little article for Mandala magazine. I have the issue here because I've got all of these old issues of Mandala on my shelf here. It was October, December 2013. I tried to find it on the internet if you're curious about it, but essentially I took this idea of working with the Lam Rem throughout your day. Now again, the Lam Rem is the teachings of the Buddha encapsulated into the 3 levels of the path, essentially giving us our initial topics to work with, our more medium topics, and then the highest topics to work with. And again, I don't want to go too deeply into that. Most of you, I think, are familiar with the Lam Rem. It's what we use as a structure in this branch of Tibetan Buddhism to work with the Buddha's teaching. So essentially, it says, okay, everything that the Buddha taught is encapsulated in this. You need to start where you are and begin to work with these teachings. So most of us have a practice of meditation where we don't just focus the mind and develop that mindfulness there, but we focus our mindfulness also on examining topics of the Lam Rem. We might look at it, for example, the topic of this, precious human rebirth that we have, this human life that gives us so much opportunity. Let's use it as an example and say, okay, well then, how would I practice Lam Rem mindfulness of that topic when I'm off my cushion? On my cushion, I'm examining that topic, coming to really understand how important this life is and how precious this life is and how I have to use this life in a meaningful way. Well, then when I get up off the cushion, I don't want it to just be, okay, well then I'm done with my meditation. Now I go about living my life in my normal diluted way. I want to inspire what I do with that thought. So that would mean that every moment of my day that I can, I bring to mind that topic so that no matter what's going on, no matter what suffering I might have to experience, no matter what happiness experiences I have, I try to think about how important this human life is, how precious this life is, and how important it is that I don't waste a single moment of this life. Because this life is not permanent. This life is not going to, stay around forever. It's changing constantly, moving in the direction of our own death. So it is important that we have that awareness. We talked about this topic of accepting death and loss a few weeks ago. So this is an important thing to be mindful of in terms of when we look at this perfect human life, that it isn't going to last forever. So we live our life with that awareness. The term that Kendall Magnuson, she did the Discovering Buddhism module on establishing a daily practice. She uses the phrase Lam Rem colored glasses. So like if you were to wear yellow shaded glasses, well then everything you'd see would be yellow, right? You'd have this yellow world around you. Well, she advises this term of Lam Rem colored glasses. So you take the topic of perfect human rebirth and you color everything you see with that topic. So, you can look at all the things that you experience throughout a day and think about how they reinforce an awareness of this perfect human life. Because every moment you have this perfect human life. But are you doing what needs to be done with this perfect human life? Are you recalling the Dharma? Kind of gives you that wonderful impetus to think, I don't want to leave this life without having used it well. That's the product of you continually being aware of that. If you were to use another topic, let's use the topic of that's taught in the middle scope of being aware of the unsatisfactory nature of existence. Well, then as you go about your day and you see things, experience things, if they're suffering in nature, like really painful, unpleasant things, well, that's more evidence of the suffering nature of samsara, right? That samsara is not satisfactory, folks. This isn't an answer. This isn't a final solution to our problems, is to be in this conditioned world where we have to experience these things. But even if we experience those things that are happy, that are somewhat pleasant, we can recall that they're called the suffering of change. They don't really last. They don't really do the trick. They don't overcome our desire for well-being and happiness. They're temporary solutions to that. So we don't get so caught up in them. We replace whatever might be going on with wisdom, the wisdom that understands that those pleasant experiences are not completely satisfactory. And then if we're experiencing something neutral, we can also recognize that that is still part of samsara, part of our conditioned experience, to have a sort of neutral experience that doesn't really do anything. Again, it doesn't solve any of our problems. You can't hang out in neutrality for the rest of eternity. So we see that everything we experience throughout the day can reinforce our understanding of the unsatisfactory nature of existence. That might be a pretty heavy topic to work with. It might be something that makes us start feeling a little depressed because we go, oh my gosh, everything in samsara is, unsatisfactory. I'm just really, kind of freaked out by being here. Well, it's once more additional impetus to generate the thought of renunciation, the thought to move towards a state where we're free of all of that, because that's also part of the middle scope teachings. But once more, this is what the idea is behind this, is you wear these Lam Rem colored glasses. I think in the article I wrote, I use the idea of driving, because we drive, most of us drive a car. Some people may not. Maybe you are driven by others. Maybe other people, take you other places because you don't have your driver's license, or maybe you take the bus where you go, or what have you, or take Uber or whatever. But most of us do spend a fair amount of time behind the wheel. So if you're behind the wheel and stuff starts happening, you can be mindful that, oh, this is just more evidence that samsara is not such a hot place to be. If you get it stuck in a traffic jam, well, you can think about that. You could also, of course, use more advanced topics. Think about compassion for the other beings who are stuck in the traffic jam with you. Anyway, I've got more examples in that article, but I think people are clear about this. So once more, every one of us every day, hopefully, should have a more formal part of our practice where we sit down, we do some focused meditation, and we review at least one topic of the Lam Rem. There's that new book, relatively new book called Lam Rem Year, where there's a meditation for each day of the year for you to be able to go through all the Lam Rem topics. So again, whatever topic it is that you meditated on that day, try to bring an awareness of it into your everyday actions. That's practicing Buddhism minute by minute. It means that you are then going to hold an awareness of that topic and deepen your understanding through everything that you encounter. And almost everything we encounter can be applied to the Lam Rem teachings in some way. There might be some where it's a little more difficult. Certainly, if you get all the way up to the wisdom teachings, the wisdom of emptiness that we were just talking about, well, then that's a whole practice in and of itself, right? To see everything that you're encountering through the lens, the colored glasses of the wisdom teachings on emptiness, to recognize that things are not concrete and self-established in the way that they appear. They're not real in the way they appear. I might add a little footnote to that. When I say they're not real in the way they appear, it doesn't mean they lack any reality. Just again, their reality is very, very subtle. Things still do exist. Don't walk out in front of a truck thinking it doesn't exist. It exists, and it will hit you and perhaps cause your death. So be mindful of all that. Be respectful of the world we live in, the conventional world, but recognize that it doesn't exist in the way it appears. So whatever Lam Rem topic you choose, you can apply it in that way. So that's one thing I want to emphasize, because I think it is an important way that we actually take these teachings. Lama Zopa Rinpoche emphasizes that Lam Rem is the real meditation. It's the meditation on our cushion, but it's also the meditation that we do throughout our day. The second is more focused on just the topic specifically of bodhicitta. Now, obviously, bodhicitta is part of our Lam Rem. It's the entryway to the third level, the great scope, where we actually see that, having looked at the law of karma and so on in the first scope, how we get a good rebirth, and then having looked at samsara and how we get free of that in the second scope, the middle scope, we then go on to generate bodhicitta. But there's this whole concept that Rinpoche is really emphasizing around bodhicitta mindfulness, and especially even practicing Tonglen throughout your day, which I'll talk about in a moment. So again, bodhicitta, as I don't need to define it necessarily, but I will, in case there is anyone that hasn't yet heard about this topic. We meditated on it briefly at the beginning of today, but it's the best motivation you can bring to your life. It is what will actually make your life the most meaningful, is if you hold that thought throughout your day of wanting to become a Buddha for the sake of others. Again, it has those two aspirations. The main aspiration is so that we can benefit all beings, because we see that they are just like us. They're suffering in the ways that we are. They are under the control of their ignorance in the ways that we are. There's no differentiation at some level between us and them, other than that we are, different mental continuums, but that's about it. Everyone's in the same soup of samsara. So how can we isolate our own welfare as being more important? Bodhicitta embraces the welfare of all beings. And then the second aspiration, to become a Buddha so we can accomplish that, to become fully enlightened so that we can help others, because a Buddha has all the qualities and abilities needed to be able to benefit all beings. So if that's your thought, and if you generate that thought at the beginning of your day, then it can carry over into bodhicitta mindfulness throughout your day. And Rinpoche has given us this wonderful tool. You can find this at the Foundation store, the FPMT's store. Oh, maybe I didn't pull it up. Let me take it off share and pull it up. It's called Cultivating Mindfulness of Bodhichitta in Daily Activities. And so let me see if I can pull it up here, and then I can get it up on the screen, because it is an important thing to kind of point to and actually show you a few of these things. I actually just brought it up the other day when I was doing the class on Thursday night. So I know it's here. Yeah, there it is. Let me go ahead and pull it up on the screen now. Okay. So again, this is a little publication that is based on actually a sutra, the Sutra of Clouds of Offerings. Again, it's called Cultivating Mindfulness of Bodhichitta in Daily Activities. And it's available through the FPMT's website, again, translated and composed by Lama Zopa, because some of these, again, do come from a sutra of the Buddha. So this isn't just Rinpoche's advice. This is, again, from, I don't know if they mentioned the sutra in here. It's also can be found in a free book from Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive called Bodhisattva Attitude. But this is the example, like, you know, when you're doing activities like lying down, sitting, standing, waking, sleeping, you have these thoughts that are all rooted in bodhicitta. You know, when you lie down, think, I am bringing all sentient beings to the sorrowless state, to the state of complete freedom from suffering. When you go to sleep, think, may all sentient beings achieve the Dharmakaya, and so on. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but it goes going to show you the sections so you get an idea of how pervasive it can be in terms of your day. When you're bathing, washing, brushing your teeth, right? We do all these things, and we normally don't practice Buddhism while we're doing them. So how do we practice Buddhism during those minutes? Well, think you're washing away all the stains of delusions of all sentient beings, not just that you're trying to avoid getting a cavity, you know, and the pain of having a filling and what have you. And then again, there's some more practices, putting on perfume, you know, any type of cologne, what have you, dressing and putting on and releasing a belt. So if you have a belt you can that you wear with your outfit, then you can, you know, think about that, but even just getting dressed and so on. We have activities around putting on ornaments, such as wearing necklaces and rings and other jewelry, what have you. You can think about offering them and so on. Washing and cleaning, you know, as part of our day, we might be washing dishes, doing laundry. We can clean a floor with all these thoughts. Again, all of them have to do with kind of removing the suffering, the delusions of all beings. Not just making it into, oh, I want to have a nice, sparkly, clean kitchen, but preparing food and cooking. I'm cutting all sentient beings self-cherishing, kind of cutting one of the main problems that keeps them from being focused on the welfare of all beings and generating bodhicitta. Or meditate with the wisdom realizing emptiness, as it says here. As you're cutting those vegetables, think you're cutting all sentient beings' ignorance and delusions, cutting all the roots of their samsara, the ignorance holding to a truly existent I. You know, all these various things. When you're eating food, of course, there's whole practices around eating food and offering food, but you want to think that you're eating for others, not think that you're just eating to fill your own belly. Going to the toilet, I find this one really quite interesting and actually relatively easy to practice. Now you can visualize Vajrasattva, this being a purification, and as you are removing substances from your own body on the toilet, you can think that all of these negativities of beings and yourself are all completely removed, purifying all of that. Blowing your nose, okay? Maybe there are certain times of the year when you've got allergies or whatever that you're doing that more frequently. But, you know, you want to once more have that idea of cleaning things, taking medicine, coming in and going out of a room through a door, you know, walking and traveling. I'm bringing all sentient beings to enlightenment. When I went through my little article on practicing the Lam Rem, you know, as when you're driving, the idea is if you're driving a car, well, you can think you're taking all sentient beings to enlightenment as you're driving that car to its destination. Again, very powerful ways to change what are normally just things that go through our lives that we don't even pay attention to, and make them into something virtuous. And then, of course, going into holy places, seeing holy objects, such as in your own shrine room, if you have that in your house, or in the Gompa there at Tupten Kungaling. You want to have, you know, various thoughts when you see these holy objects and what have you. Offering incense. You know, these maybe again are a little more specific in terms of activities that already we might be doing as part of our daily practice. But you can transform anything you do into bodhicitta mindfulness, into something that actually has great power to it. This is how you keep your mind in virtue. Even when you sit down to, you know, relax at the end of the day and turn on Netflix or whatever it is that you watch. Think that you're doing this for the sake of all beings. Generate a motivation of bodhicitta. May all beings, find relaxation and ability to, work with their minds through tending to themselves, caring for themselves. Do it with a good motivation. Don't do it with the mind of attachment that just wants to get totally caught up in that, escapism and what have you. Do it for the benefit of others. I think Lama Yeshe in his last public teaching he gave before he passed away in 1983 with this teaching on bodhicitta, he said, you come home from a hard day of work and whatever, and you just don't feel like doing any meditation or anything, just lay down on the couch, but lay down with bodhicitta, think about bodhicitta. Whatever you do, try to bring bodhicitta into play. Now, why that's being emphasized, the first topic that I looked at again just previously was all the Lam Rem topics. And obviously it is good to have an incorporation of whatever it is you're meditating on throughout your day. But bodhicitta is the most powerful mind. I often talk about how I obviously don't know all spiritual traditions. I've never dabbled in all of the variety of things that are out there, but I've never encountered in just the ones that I have looked at a mind as powerful as this, a mind that is embracing this concept of dedication to the welfare of all beings and a desire to benefit them by developing oneself to the greatest degree. Even in the Theravadan tradition, more classically, again, I'm not saying all Theravadan practitioners lack this mind, but in that tradition, more traditionally, they would not develop compassion to that degree. They would say, yes, I want all beings to not suffer and to not, have the causes of that and to attain real well-being and happiness. But they don't go to the degree of saying, and I will do that. We need to strengthen this mind. I was talking earlier about how one of the problems is our habitual reactions and our habitual tendencies, our patterns that just cause us to go through our day without being attentive to our Buddhist practice. Well, bodhicitta can change all of that, can make us essentially much more powerful in our practice, because if we're constantly thinking about it, we're creating unbelievable merit. Because the thought of bodhicitta, unlike the thought of just compassion for, an ant that's crawling on your counter, that compassion for that one being is powerful. But you're having the compassionate thought and the loving thought towards all beings when you generate bodhicitta. The basis is huge. Every single sentient being, we can't even get our heads around that. Here in New Mexico, we get a lot of ants in the summer, and they're like, you see all these ants and ant hills everywhere. And on the ground here where just a few human beings live, there's just immense numbers of all these ants. This is just one little space here in this one, subdivision in Santa Fe. My gosh, we start talking about all the creatures that live on the land and the water and everything. Can't get our heads around that. Every time we generate bodhicitta with the aim of all those beings, becomes incredibly powerful. So the second thing I wanted to mention is this idea of Tonglen that's part of this cultivating of bodhicitta mindfulness. Tonglen, as most of you know, is one of the techniques, one of the meditations it's used in helping to cultivate bodhicitta, because it's one where we actually generate the compassionate wish to remove the suffering of others, to at least hold some awareness of their suffering whenever we are suffering, and then to also want them to have happiness. I'm going to provide this little handout. This is something that I got downloaded off of the FPMT's website a long time ago. They used to have these things they sent out, and they don't do it anymore, of kind of daily advice from Rinpoche that they would put into a little file and you could download it. And this is, again, Tonglen is usually translated as taking and giving, even though technically Tong is giving and Len is taking, but Tonglen is usually taking and giving. And so Rinpoche gives this little example of how he was at, after His Holiness's teachings, and he was talking to this woman, and says one of the ladies sitting next to me had pain in the jaw. And so she asked how to deal with it. So then I told her, it is very important to do this prayer every day. When you have happiness, think, may all sentient beings have happiness and peace. When you have suffering, problems, cancer, AIDS, relationship problem, whatever, think, may all sentient beings' oceans of samsaric sufferings be dried out. And so as he says there then, the idea is to do Tonglen practice from time to time each day, especially when you do this practice of taking the sufferings. You collect limitless skies of merit each time because you are taking the sufferings for numberless beings. and purifying not only this life's negative karma, but also past life negative karma. So the stronger you generate compassion for animals or human beings, then many eons of negative karma get purified. And when you do the practice of giving, you purify today's, this life's, and past life's negative karma. It purifies many eons of negative karma. So again, at every moment of our day, we are experiencing one of three feelings, right? You're either having a pleasant feeling, which I hope you're having now, and then you may be experiencing a neutral feeling, which of course we just go through those. We often doesn't even register as much of a feeling. And then we have what we might call a painful feeling. These can be in our mind, these can be in our body, but everything is obviously registered within the mental continuum. So you're going to have some sort of feeling. When you have a pleasant feeling, Rinpoche is telling you, think of, may all beings have happiness. It's a subtle form of Tonglen. It's not where you're actually giving that all away necessarily. You're at least holding an awareness of others who you would ideally like to have that same experience. As I said, when you sit down to watch Netflix, when you do whatever, think, may others have happiness. May others have well-being as well. When you experience the painful things, then obviously we have a lot to work with there. It increases our compassion when we connect with the suffering of others, when we think, just as I want to be free from this pain at this moment, may all beings be free from their suffering. Kind of helps you get out of this sort of narrow focus. I often find it whenever I do this practice, it's really uplifting because it gets you out of this tight focus that we have of me, myself, and I, and my own experience, which is there whether I'm happy or neutral or unhappy, right? It's this tendency that we have to just latch onto that and live our lives from this very narrow focus. And when we begin to become more expansive by thinking about others, again, we can generate these sort of Tonglen kind of thoughts. Through my experience of the suffering, may it be a touchstone for me to think about the suffering of others, for me to want them to be free. Whenever I experience happiness, may it be a cause for me to think of the happiness of others and wanting them to have ultimate well-being, everything all the way up to enlightenment. This is how, once more, every moment of your day. Now you might wonder, well, how do I practice with the neutral? Well, the neutral feelings, they're there. You can say, well, may all beings eventually experience, a freedom from even this conditioning of a neutral experience. They say that the bliss of Buddhahood goes so far beyond even the happiness that we've experienced. You ideally want beings ultimately to have that state. So anything we meet throughout our day can become the cause for that. So these two I put together, Bodhichitta and Tonglen, because they're very much about the same concept. One is to hold that awareness of bodhicitta through whatever I am doing throughout my day. May it become a cause for me to be able to benefit all beings by becoming a Buddha. The other one is more specific with regard to Tonglen and that practice of working with suffering feelings and pain, happiness feelings as well. Let me go on to the last thing, which there's quite a bit to, but I'll touch on maybe some of the key points of, and then again, I'll send that document on to Patty. And if you are interested in receiving any of these documents, again, do send your email address to Patty's email address, spc@tuptenkongaling.org, I think. Anyway, Patty will put it in the chat box if she hasn't already. This is what Rinpoche put together as called specific ways of practicing during activities as a label I'm giving to it. Essentially, it's this document that's called Practicing Dharma in Daily Life. Now, again, this document goes back to like 1998. No, 1988. My gosh, a long time ago. Only a few years after Rinpoche became the spiritual director of FPMT after Lama Yeshe died. And there are essentially a number of points, and I'm not putting them in the exact same order that they are in the document, but he kind of goes through a typical day and gives you all this wonderful advice about how you wake up and set your motivation. And now he does have, since this was published back in 1988, he has a more formal way of setting your motivation and blessing the speech and all that at the beginning of your day. But then he goes through how to go through your bathing. And we already talked a little bit about some, those bodhicitta mindfulness things you can do while you're bathing. But there's even a more extensive visualization you can do in that, making offerings on your altar and your formal daily practice and how you would go about that. Eating and drinking, enjoying sense objects beyond food and drink, working, and then at the end of day and sleeping. So let me go through the document. I'm just going to put it up on the screen and share a few things about it. And I'll mention give you the reference to that other document that again is a Rinpoche's more updated thing. This is a version of it that I think originally I got this off of Thupten Chodron, Venerable Thupten Chodron's website, because he had been again in Singapore in 1988, and he gave this advice to a family about how they go about living their life, practicing the Dharma. So he has this wonderful visualization when you wake up. Visualize the Buddha on the crown of your head, and you go through some thought process about how fortunate it is and how you want to cherish others throughout your day and so on. You make a request to the Buddha about how you want him to inspire you throughout your day to make use of whatever you do throughout that life to help you to become a Buddha for the sake of others. This is kind of taking Bodhichitta mindfulness and really putting it into a couple of key times during our day. Really important that we start our day with a very positive motivation. And then the next step is Guru Shakyamuni Buddha is pleased with your request, wanting, the inspiration to be able to practice in this way. He melts into light, which flows through your crown to your heart, blessing, inspiring, transforming your mind, and think that you've received all the Buddha's qualities. You can then go about your day, practicing in that way. So you can imagine a small Buddha made of light appearing at your heart throughout the day. Think of the Buddha constantly. In this way, you'll become more mindful of what you do, say, and think, as you will be aware of Buddha witnessing it. This is one way. Remember, one of the obstacles, the hindrances I talked about was that we lack that mindfulness. Well, if you think that the Buddha is constantly with you there, giving you that inspiration, helping you to become more mindful, well, then that may be an impetus to help you overcome that mindlessness to your day. Now, at this point, he had, in that original practice, reading the 8 verses of thought transformation, but know that again, whoops, I may have to move things around. Let me move this over here now so that I can push this out. I've got this little menu at the top of my screen when I'm sharing things, sharing documents. This is the more recent one that has been published, I don't know, a couple years now, but it's also attainable at the FPMT's shop, the Foundation store, The Method to Transform a Suffering Life into Happiness, including Enlightenment. In fact, in the Exploring Buddhism module on common prayers and practices, I'll be teaching on this. That's going to be quite a ways in the future. Now we're going to have a little change with the scheduling of Exploring Buddhism that you'll hear about soon. But essentially, this document and a commentary on it are available at FPMT's website, the shop. So know that again, I'm sorry I'm moving forward here, but when I get to the actual practice, it starts with saying what you do at the beginning of your day, kind of similar. It didn't have the visualization of the Buddha, but generating this kind of positive thought. You do a little meditation on all the topics of the Lam Rem. Go through that. Again, I'll just page forward. It's a wonderful little prayer that kind of gives you that impetus. And then he had the first verse of the 8 verses here, as well as some other verses. And I won't go through the remainder of that, but essentially giving you some impetus to think of others, to want to practice for the sake of others, to practice mind training, which again, we're going through on Thursday night in the module of Exploring Buddhism that's happening right now. But you have to start your day generating this very positive motivation of wanting to benefit others. Rinpoche also includes in that practice that I just had on the screen, blessing your speech so that your speech becomes very powerful. It said that through that technique, even if you do engage in like gossiping with others and what have you, it has great power to it because you've blessed your speech. Obviously, we want to avoid those sorts of things as much as possible, but nonetheless, can make our speech very powerful throughout our day through that technique. So let's go back to how Rinpoche continues on. Again, I had, whoops, over here. Now I've gotten that other one out of the, I've got to go back to, okay, here it is again. Okay. Eating and drinking. I'm not going to tell them quite the order that I had on the thing. I said bathing next because sometimes people bathe before they eat and drink, but before you eat or drink, you have these positive thoughts again about why you're doing that so you can achieve enlightenment. You try to visualize the food as being very pure. If the Buddha is at your heart, you can think that you're offering the Buddha that food in the form of this divine nectar. As you enjoy sense objects during the day, whatever it is, music, again, you sit down to watch Netflix or whatever it is that you watch, think that you're offering them to Guru Shakyamuni Buddha, continually making offerings of all those pleasant things. As I said, you can also, certainly do Tonglen and think of others having the happiness of those objects. That's a wonderful thing to do. And then, of course, if we have things we don't enjoy during our day, we can use the Tonglen practice of thinking of the suffering of others, right? When we make offerings on the altar, again, there's whole practices around this, doing offerings. We want to once more do that with our Bodhichitta motivation, with a strong desire to benefit others. He gives a little, mini offering practice here that you do. But even at the end of the offering, think whatever happiness and virtue I've accumulated, may all beings receive it. Whatever suffering sentient beings have, may it ripen on me. That's a Tonglen meditation. So once more, you can do that same sort of thing with regard to everything that you experience. Hey, like I said, I'll pass this practice on to Patty so she can make it available to you. Even though it's a little dated, 1988, I think it's a wonderful tool to use. Now, as you go through your workday, think, I must achieve enlightenment in order to lead each and every sentient being to that state. Therefore, I'm going to do service for sentient beings by going to work. If you're doing, as Rinpoche says, if you're doing work in order to provide for your family or your pets even, it is service to sentient beings, right? You're not just serving yourself, you're serving others. But if you don't have to provide for others in that way, you nevertheless need these necessary material conditions in order to practice the Dharma so that you can benefit others. You can think in that way. I'm going to work to be able to have the resources I need to be able to benefit others. While you're at work, remember the kindness of other sentient beings who gave you the job and who make it possible for you to earn a living. Kind of keeps you from having a negative state at work. I worked in the corporate world for a number of years before I went off to Italy to study in the master's program and made a pretty serious change in my life by becoming a Dharma teacher and so on. But when I worked for Levi's, even the years where I was practicing Buddhism, I tried to hold those thoughts. Levi Strauss, of course, manufactures clothes for people, and it's not the most virtuous thing, but it's a wonderful thing to provide, right? Most people own a pair of Levi's jeans or some sort of Levi's clothing. So I could think that even though my job was distant from the actual making of the clothes, I was working more with the finances behind it and the strategic planning and all these sorts of things. I was still wanting to do it with the aim that what I'm doing is contributing to the welfare of others through what we're producing that can be enjoyed by others, can be a part of protecting their bodies and whatever. So again, most of us are involved in some sort of occupation that has some benefit to others. I mean, if we're not doing something that is beneficial to others, if we're engaged in like creating rat poison or something like that, well then maybe it's a little bit harder to transform. But ideally, we want to be involved in occupations that are at least benign to others, if not beneficial to others. And most of what is in the world benefits others because you have clients and people who come to you for various things. So once more, try to hold a bigger thought to it. Not just this is about putting money in my wallet so I can have the food and things that I enjoy. It's about giving me the resources and be able to benefit others through sustaining my life and so on. And that's a whole nother, I think I've done a separate little thing on work as a spiritual path that I have done before in the past as well. But it is important that we bring our spiritual practice into our work and not make our work kind of a separate part of our life that is detached from our spiritual practice, our practice of Buddhism. Even bathing, which again, I moved up to the beginning because most people don't bathe after they go to work. Well, maybe they do. Some people do come home and I guess bathe before they go to bed at night. But you think you're going to bathe yourself by transforming this action into the cause to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. And he gives you a wonderful little visualization to go with that, to think that this is, washing and purifying all your negativities through the Buddha or whatever Buddha you're working with being above the crown of your head. And as the water's flowing down through you, it's doing that. And then we have sleeping and our end of the day practice. So as is normally said, it's good to purify our actions at the end of the day, by engaging in the four opponent powers. They're on the screen here. I'm not going to go through them again. I'm sure I've talked to most of you about them before, but it's really important at the end of your day to sort of purify and clean up any of the things that you did that weren't so beneficial. And that's a very powerful part of our day as well. That's how we use Buddhism at the end of our day, to recall all those and to also make a determination to work better in the future, to make sure that we get up the next day with some enthusiasm for continuing to work with our minds. And then before going to bed, think, again, I take strong refuge, and I want to be able to, benefit others through all my actions. We can visualize Guru Guru Vajrasattva on the crown of our head, and in that way, think that we're sort of purifying all of our obstacles and so on. There was one other teaching I saw where Rinpoche advised like going to bed with you're kind of falling to sleep in the lap of the Buddha. I thought that was really sweet, to kind of think that you're going to bed in the, oh, that's down here later. Yeah. So again, you can do that sort of purification with Vajrasattva, and then you can go on, and when you go to bed, think that you're going to engage in sleep for the benefit of others. Lie down. This is the lion position, is where you're lying on your right hand side, which is how Buddha lay down when he passed away. And he says here, remember the kindness and sufferings of sentient beings. Go to sleep feeling love towards them. Visualize Guru Shakyamuni Buddha on your pillow and put your head in his lap. Very gentle light flows from the Buddha into you, and by remembering the Buddha's enlightened qualities with devotion, fall asleep. So actually, I think this version of it I found at Dharma Friendship, which was an old organization that Venerable Tipton Chodron worked with. I'm not even sure if they're around, but again, I'll pass that document along, because it gives, again, these kind of very specific things that we can look at. We can go, oh, wow, I can transform that. I can work with that. Now, as I did on Thursday night with all of these bits of advice that we're getting in the Lojong teachings, it's really important that you don't say, okay, now I'm going to do this every moment of the day. The theme for today was practicing Buddhism minute by minute, but know that it starts with just being attentive to what you can. Don't think that you're going to have the mindful awareness all day to recall Bodhichitta or precious human rebirth or whatever topic it is that you're working with. Be very patient with your own mind, turning your mind towards the Dharma, wanting to, engage in these teachings as best as you can. And don't beat yourself up if you're incapable of doing that. If you lose it one day and you just totally forgot to remember Bodhichitta, for most of the day, so what? You can, kind of do your practice at the end of the day, make a determination to wake up the next day and try to do better. And then the next day, if you remember it once or twice, wonderful, rejoice, be very happy at the progress that you're making. But the only way we're going to actually accomplish it is by making that determination that this is what we're going to do with our lives, which, as I said earlier, comes from the strong faith in the teachings, a real aspiration that we keep cultivating day in and day out, so that then we actually do the work and we actually, again, roll up our sleeves and go happily about our business. But it should be joyous. We use this idea of having some necessary discipline with regard to ourselves, but let it be a compassionate discipline, one that really understands that what we're trying to create is the best causes of happiness for both ourselves and others. Then it becomes something you can engage in quite joyously. So we have a little bit of time left. Let me see if there are any questions or comments from anybody on what I've talked about today. I hope it was beneficial. I don't know. Sometimes I throw these things out and I never know. I never get any feedback later on, like a year later, somebody saying, oh, that teaching you gave me, that was really useful. But I do hope it's useful. Anyone? Nothing?
Hi,
Yeah,
Dawn.
Peggy. Hi, Peggy. So
Oh.
good to see you.
I was just going to say it is extremely useful, and I don't want to wait a year from now to tell you. I plan on, of course, so much of what you're teaching we've heard before, but each time you learn a little something else. So I plan on putting it to action as soon as I get off
Good.
this suit. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Peggy. Thank you for being here and for those kind words. No, and again, I've given you sort of 3 ways to work with things to some degree. There is overlap, because obviously that last one, when we look through Rinpoche's sort of daily things, there's a lot of bodhicitta in that. The second one, the bodhicitta mindfulness, those other techniques of when you turn on a light switch or whenever you do whatever, all these various things that you can have different thoughts that accompany that. And of course, practice Tonglen. And the first one, that we can actually just bring whatever topic we're meditating on into our daily life and try to recall it as we go about our life. That's a lot. Again, choose one of those that sounds like something that you'd be really excited about doing, and then begin to work with it gradually. you'll begin to try to transform. Okay, I'm just today going to work on my meals. When I sit down to eat, I'm going to work on those. And then maybe the next day you think about, or maybe next week, let's practice that for a while. The next week or even next month, you decide you're going to work on when you're cleaning and bathing, and then you work with those, and so on. You see what I mean? It's just like something that over time, then it becomes second nature. When it becomes second nature, then you actually have changed your mind. You're actually living from that place of these wonderful positive thoughts. That's how we're going to make progress. The little bit of practice that we do, if we don't, practice the rest of our day by working with our minds, isn't enough. It's just not sufficient. Especially because the bulk of our day then will be probably following those habitual minds of delusion, of crazy thoughts and what have you, and strengthening those. And so the little bit of time we spend on the cushion isn't enough to get the boat turned around, like I said earlier, and then to get the river eventually going in the opposite direction. So any other comments or questions? Thank you again for that, Peggy. Anyone else? Yeah,
Marianne,
Patty.
were you going to say something? No, I think Marianne
I
had
was.
unmuted.
Oh, please, Marianne.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to tell you, you outdid yourself today. You really did. You're so eloquent and so clear. And today it was just so meaningful to me. All of your talks are great, but today it was extra special to me. So thank you for being here and for, leading us in the right direction, I hope. I'm sure. I mean, it's up to us, to go in that direction. That's what I meant. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Marianne. And I'm indebted to, again, all of my teachers. I shared today so much of Rinpoche's advice, and we all, feel a very warm spot in our heart for Rinpoche and for what he is for our organization. So I'm glad that I could convey and share some of what he taught with all of you. But I'm so indebted to all my teachers. So it's only due to their kindness that I'm able to even share a word of Dharma. So, but thank you for those words. I appreciate them. So, and as Marianne was pointing out, it really is up to us. They often use this analogy of like the Dharma being like medicine, but you don't like take medicine if you've got an illness and like put it on your mantelpiece and show everybody all the wonderful medicine that you have without taking it, right? You can maybe praise the medicine, but only once you know that the medicine works, and only once you know that it's actually something that you've been able to utilize. So the medicine of the Dharma is there for all of us to utilize. If we want to just keep it on a shelf, well, that's our choice. Can admire it and say, oh, this is a wonderful jewel of Dharma that we have here, but the real goal is to get you to practice it. The real goal is to actually change your mind. So I hope I've inspired you to do some of that with the words I've shared, especially from Rinpoche and so on. But any other comments or questions? Thank you for that, Marianne, as well. I'm so looking forward to seeing all of you in a few months. It'll be nice to be back in Deerfield Beach and spending time with all of you at the center there. So I hope to see you all then. Let's go ahead and just do dedication prayers then. And as I said, I will pass along these documents to Patty, so be sure to write to her to let her know that you're interested in receiving them. Let's go back to the prayers. And again, we just have been doing these two verses that are on the screen here. The first 4 lines pertain to this idea of dedicating, making sure that all the positive potential that we've created through our time together here today, and we can even think about throughout our lives, and even think about all beings and all the merits that have been created, may they bring about the greatest possible result of our own enlightenment and the enlightenment of all beings. In the last 4 lines, where we recall Bodhichitta, we focused on this a lot today, because this is how we make our lives meaningful to the greatest degree. May this precious mind of Bodhichitta grow and develop in our own hearts and in the hearts of all beings, especially in the hearts of those who are causing difficulty in this world, who are negative in their behavior and causing pain for other people and inflicting war on nations and all the various things that are going on. May those beings find this precious mind of Bodhichitta, turn their lives towards the Dharma, and become enlightened quickly. So let's recite these 2 verses with those thoughts in mind. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel Bodhichitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And let's take a moment to think about our precious teachers. Again, we've worked with Rinpoche's teachings a lot today. Lama Zopa Rinpoche is obviously a being who we want to continue to have in this world. So we make strong prayers for his good health and long life, but also, of course, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Continue to have his wishes be fulfilled, to have his health be good, and for him to have a very long life so we and others can continue to benefit from his presence in this world. And then all the other gurus that we have a connection with and all other spiritual teachers, regardless of their tradition, if they are helping others to find a path that leads to greater well-being, may they continue to be in this world and aid others in that way. Lastly, we dedicate for all those beings that we're holding in our hearts right now, those beings who are experiencing all the grosser forms of suffering that we are connected to personally or that we are thinking of at this time in various parts of the world who are enduring that type of suffering. Thinking of those beings, we send this positive energy out to them in this sort of spirit of Tonglen. Think that they receive the benefit of what we've done today, so it removes all their suffering immediately and helps them to have all the causes of happiness all the way to enlightenment. And may not just these beings, but all beings benefit from what we've done today in that same way. Okay, terrific. This has been really great spending these Sunday mornings in June with you. And as I said, I'm very much looking forward to seeing you all in September. So take care and be well.